You're live.
So, I want to talk about the 5 weeks that I was in Fredonia, which were the last 4 weeks of my father's life, and then that extra week with the funeral services. And I want to talk about it through the lens of tender mercies. So, let me just give a background on my connection to tender mercies. So, like I would say, starting 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about gratitude. I mean, scientists were doing research about how gratitude is so beneficial to mental health. Um, and so, in church, they started talking about it, doing workshops and Relief Society lessons. And so I started to do these intentional gratitude exercises, not like super consistently, but like whenever I was driving to Chico, I would try to think of 3 things I was grateful for. When I go walking, I try to make it a gratitude walk and think of things I'm grateful for as I walk, that sort of thing. And I think it really does help. I have personal experience with how those kinds of mental efforts to feel gratitude are beneficial. And you can speak about that, and you can call it counting your blessings or seeing the tender mercies, or just being grateful. So I want to read a quote. This is Elder Gerald N. Lund, and this comes out of the ARP program. It's quoted in one of the steps, and it says, "Sometimes blessings come in such an unusual manner and with such precise timing that they accomplish something in addition to blessing us. They so clearly confirm the reality of God's existence that they buoy us up in times of trials." And I love that quote. It's like sometimes the blessing comes in a way that you cannot deny that is God speaking to you and saying, I am aware. And so I'm going to let this little thing happen so that you go, okay, God's aware. It also makes me think of Thanksgiving 2020. We were 6 months into the pandemic, and President Nelson did his Give Thanks campaign, which was this little idea he got in the middle of the night that for 7 days, people were supposed to post a daily give thanks something that they were thankful for. And it became this international social media event. Like, it blew all the algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it worked so well because in a very simple way, he asked people in the middle of this crisis where people were dying, and out of work and so many terrible things happening, to look for the tender mercies, to give thanks. And so that was an opportunity to see that principle in action. You have Alma's people and how their burdens were made light. And gratitude, I think, does that for us. It makes everyday life lighter, but it makes times of trial especially lighter. I also think there's a difference between just being grateful for something and being grateful to God for something. Like when I do my walks, I don't just count blessings. Like, I'm grateful for the trees. I'm grateful it's cooler this morning. I try to make it a form of prayer where I can visualize Heavenly Father in my mind, and I'm like, thank you, Heavenly Father, for these trees. They're beautiful. Thank you that it's cooler. So that I'm feeling that gratitude towards Him and not just in this abstractive, in an abstraction. I think tender mercies are constant, and sometimes we see them and sometimes we don't. And when we're in the midst of an intense trial, I think we see them more easily because we're just more alert, more mentally intense during a time of trial. And so we can more easily see the tender mercies, especially if we're looking for them. Okay, I have a timeline for my dad for his last months and weeks. So Thanksgiving week of 2021, He went to a youth event. You know how the youth are always feeding the elderly a Thanksgiving dinner, right?
Yeah.
So he attends that, and two of the youth had RSV, and they were walking around serving all these elderly people. So a bunch of them got RSV too. And there was a rash of RSV during that time with babies and elderly, especially having trouble with it. So Dad gets RSV. Mike and Brenda had already moved in. Mike didn't want Brenda to get RSV because she had some health issues. And so Mike determined that Dad needed to be quarantined in his own bedroom. So Mike set him up with a big screen TV and a little table where he could eat. He would bring him meals. And Dad was pretty good about it. He put up with it for most of December. And finally, December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, the doctor said he was good and could stop wearing his mask to protect Brenda. So Mike thinks that bout of RSV was what kind of sent Dad on this final downturn. So anyway, he has RSV. He gets over it. February 12th, we get a message from Mike that Dad was not feeling well, and that Dad was saying, this is the end. And it was kind of a cryptic time. Like, we didn't really know what was going on. It was just all coming through the text group. But for some reason, I totally freaked out because I'm the trustee. I knew, I'd been thinking over the years the responsibilities that would fall on me when Dad passed. And so I just freaked out. Like, this is it. Oh my gosh, all this stuff I'm going to have to do. So I can't sleep. I'm freaking out. And what happened at that point, well, a couple of days later, they did an MRI of his lungs and they saw the fluid that was building up. So, for 2 or 3 days, I'm freaking out about the trustee thing. And then I'm sort of getting over it as things are playing out. February 25th, he went to St. George and had the fluid drained. So it's a hospital procedure. You're under general anesthesia. He has the fluid drained. And then in my mind, I'm like, well, I guess that was it, and he'll be okay now. Like, it was all behind me. But it's like, hello, fluid was building up on his lungs. Just because it got drained doesn't mean he's good now. I just didn't think of it. So March 4th was a Friday. They take him to the ER with shortness of breath. They do a CAT scan that shows the fluid had returned and had doubled. And they got a report from the St. George procedure that confirmed he had heart failure. And that was the first time we heard that term.
Okay.
So we scheduled a heat and huddle. That's what we call our little Zoom meetings for Saturday morning. So Dad's in the hospital at this point. So we talked that morning, and Mike and Brett explained things to us. And I was very calm. I mean, the night before when they said he was in the ER, the thought did come to me, this could be it. And there was no freak out. It was like the freak out was out of the way. It really was. Yeah. It was like, where's the freak out? Well, I guess I already did that. And so for some reason, I was very calm. And after that Zoom meeting was over, I knew I had to fly. I had to get myself to Fredonia. And I had that Saturday to get everything in order. So that's where I was after that Zoom meeting. March 6th, I flew to Salt Lake. I drove down with Lance. March 7th, which was a Monday, he was released from the hospital. Allison and I were there. Tuesday, March 8th, we took him in for a haircut. That was the last time he left the house. So that was March 8th. Okay, keep in mind he died March 31st. Okay. So this is the run-up. Wednesday, March 9th was the hospital intake interviews. So that's not hospital. Hospice. So that's when the hospice nurse came explained hospice to him, asked him if it's what he wanted. He said yes, signed papers, explained things. So that was the intake. March 14, we snowed him, which means you give them way too much medication. They give you hospice drugs, but the main one is morphine, right? So he was having a little bit of shortness of breath. Mike and I freaked out, gave him way too much. And it took him about 2 days to crawl out of it.
Because you thought it was the end. You're like, oh my gosh, like this is
Yeah.
the end. Let's make sure he doesn't feel any pain. You give it to him.
Yeah.
And then as he's crawling out of it, you're like, oh, he's crawling out of it. Okay.
And I was there when they released him from the hospital, and they gave him 2 to 4 weeks. So, okay, here's the thing about hospice. Let me say this little bit about hospice. Hospice didn't used to be a thing. Like there were hospice nurses who did hospice, but governments were not paying for it. It was like, no, if you're sick, you're in the hospital. But this home hospice stuff, it took a long time and a lot of pressuring and lobbying for government to get on board and say, okay, we'll pay for home health and hospice. And I think it's because the government finally realized that it was a lot cheaper to have clueless family members taking care of end-of-life patients than nurses and doctors in the hospital.
And he's not taking up a room, right?
Yes. Yeah. and it's like, oh, the family's clueless. Oh, it's all right.
Give him a jar of morphine and just say...
It all sort of happens the same way anyway. So anyway, when we snowed him, that's when I'm like, we're so clueless. And they don't really care.
The fact that they have a term for it.
Snowed him, yeah.
Yeah, they have a term for it, so it's happening. They're not doing anything to change it.
So after that, he actually did really well for a few days. So well, in fact, that in the sibling group, we talked about how we might start having to do month-to-month rotations. I mean, he was doing well enough that Allison were like, we can't stay here forever. You know, if he goes longer, then we're going to, Lance takes a month, Ginny takes a month. But then he had a downturn. Tuesday, the 29th, I'll explain later about the Special Needs Trust, but he signed a Special Needs Trust, which was the tool which would allow Brett to get money without it affecting his benefits. And we had been talking to Dad about it. He knew we were working with a lawyer, and he knew he had to sign that before he died. So he signed that early afternoon. That Tuesday evening was his final downturn, and it was the final downturn. So that was Tuesday night. So he signs the Special Needs Trust early afternoon, and the day before, Janae had made dinner for us, and it was this, like the ultimate comfort food. She makes these mashed potatoes. It must just be 3,000 calories a serving. But, oh my gosh, they're so good. And then these beef patties and this mushroom sauce. And Dad ate it the night before, loved it. And then he had leftovers Tuesday. I would say about 5. He had leftovers. And then later that night, final downturn. So I really look at that meal Janae made. It was a really special meal. It's kind of his final meal. It's so funny that, sometimes I talk to people about this and they just think that I'm callous, that I'm way too callous about all of it. But I have thought about all this stuff. And that meal was meant to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think food is like way just more important than like 3 days. Like I was there that weekend, so like that Thursday and Friday before, and Drew Chandler and his family were in there meeting with him, and kind of as a joke, I went in there and was like, "Hey, Grandpa!" Like, by the way, I went in there somber. Like the Chandlers, like they're saying because they're gonna leave, they're not gonna see him again. They know it's the last time they see him, so it's like this really sad mood. And I just popped in, and I was like, "Hey, Grandpa, I'm heading to Big Al's. Like, what do you want?" And it was like, to me, that was a joke. Like, what is he going to order from Big Al's? Like, he's not eating really at all. Like, maybe like a little sandwich or something. And he just pauses and then like give me a cheeseburger. Like, like, oh, you're going to Big Al's? Yeah, I'll get a cheeseburger. And I just think it was just a testament to just how important it seems like a silly detail, or like, oh, it was the last meal. It's like, no, food is really important. It can make you feel a certain way. I don't know.
And he ate pretty well the whole time. He ate well. Okay, the next day, Wednesday, March 30th, he was bedridden. He was not responsive. The health aide came and taught us how to roll him and diaper him. I mean, that's where we were. And that night, that Wednesday night, we had somebody in the room at all times. We moved a chair in there so we could be in there. So Tuesday night, final downturn, and from there on, unresponsive, 24-hour care. And then March 31st, Thursday, the day he passed, I had taken a shift, I think from midnight to 4, and then I was up, and then I wanted to take a nap because I'd been up most of the night. Oh, wait, that morning, Jordan Hatch came. She was the main RN that we saw most of the time, and we talked to her quite a bit. You know what? Let me get into that later. But soon after lunch, Allison and Mike went in to roll Dad, and I had just laid down for a nap. And I couldn't roll him. I wasn't tall enough. I mean, if we had just lowered the bed, I could have done it. But they had the bed up high, so Mike and Allison were rolling him. He had all the fluid was developing on his left lung, and he was laying center. And when they rolled him onto his right side, boom, he was gone. That's what took him, was rolling him. And there was some drama around that moment, but that's what took him.
Because of the fluid is now in both lungs or something?
Well, okay, so...
Or is that...
So fluid was developing on the outside of his lung, and then I would say like the last 7 days, you could hear it developing in his lungs. So not only
so
did
as he's breathing, as he's talking,
you can hear the fluid. And so you have the outside fluid putting pressure on the lung, and then fluid in the lungs developing.
Gotcha.
And I think when they rolled him, just the weight, I mean, Mosdale's, the morticians later told us there was a gallon of fluid on his lung. And so when they rolled him, just the weight of it, I think collapsed his lung, and it was all it was time. It was what took him. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about tender mercies. So when Mom passed, she went on hospice. She'd been in the home for 2 months. Then they put her on hospice. And as soon as she went on hospice, I went back to spend a few days. And so I was there when she was still kind of alert and knew who I was. And I was, we were there every day helping. And then I went home, and she passed 3 weeks later. And what happened was Dad was there that night, my dad. And the nurse came in. They kind of knew it was close. It was getting close. And she worked with her and helped, get her ready for the night. And she told my dad, I don't think tonight's the night. I think you can go. And so he left and went home. Janae and 2 of the girls came to visit, pretty soon after. And Janae saw it. She was like, she's going tonight. So she called Brett and said, I think you better be up here. I think she's closer than they think. So Brett was there when it happened. And when I got the call from Brett, she had just passed. It was like 1-ish. She had just passed, and I literally I had gotten home from closing night of the musical Mary Poppins at the high school, and I had been home about 20 minutes, and I wasn't yet in bed, or I wouldn't have heard the landline ring. But I was still milling around. I hear the landline. I go pick it up, and it's Brett. And the timing of her death, I mean, I remember being on the phone with Brett going, this is so amazingly convenient for me, and it's so wrong for me to even notice that it is.
Like it's selfish. I go, she that worked out for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I kept telling myself it must be good for a lot of other people too, I hope. But the timing was so perfect for me that I couldn't help but see the tender mercies. Okay, this is a long list of tender mercies, and I have them categorized. You ready?
Yeah.
Boom, here we go. This is the Saturday in Gridley. So we have the Zoom meeting that Saturday morning. I make flight plans. I know I'm flying out Sunday morning.
So this is a little bit more timeline context.
So this is the
Dean,
the day after we get his diagnosis.
Dean's diagnosis.
Okay. Yeah. So Saturday morning, I know he's going on hospice. He's got a few weeks left, and I've got to go back. So I make flight plans for Sunday morning. So I've got Saturday day to get all the ducks in a row. And I was able to do everything. I was able to do payroll and pay the bills. Those weeks in Fredonia were exactly between 2 invoicing periods. I paid the invoices before I left, and as soon as I got back, I paid the invoices for the next month's cycle. This is what I'm talking about. Like, I hope other people are getting tender mercies, because I'm sure getting them.
Yeah.
And let me just say that doing the books for the business is such a stressor for me that I feel like this was huge for me, and God knew it would be huge. Okay, the musical Little Mermaid was going to perform the next weekend. I'm in charge of preparing the house, right? The audience seating, the cleaning, the chairs, the vacuuming, the backdrops for the audience. And the year before, somebody had suggested to me, why don't you train a few parents? And so I had 3 parents that I worked with on the previous musical, and they had already come into the process. They'd been helping me. So like that ball was rolling, and I didn't need to be there. It was like, wow.
Yeah.
Russ was willing and able to let me go and to do Dave. Work was slow. And as soon as we got back after the funeral, his work went nuts. But during those 5 weeks, work was slow. And for work that was happening, his worker, Bill Miner, by that point was already an independent worker and could do a lot without Russ there. Dave was in school, which was huge. It was not summer break for him. And he had his spring break the week after I got home. and that would have been hard for Dad.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have had those 8 hours. We had Russ signed up for IHSS, which is the program that pays Dad and me to take care of Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And it had taken us a long time to get Dad signed up, but we had that in place so that Dad could get paid while I was gone. In fact, when they came to Fredonia the week of the funeral,
Dad and Dave.
Yeah, and I'm not taking care of my dad anymore. And so I'm all of a sudden more involved with Dave. I'm like, oh yeah, Dave is a lot of work. Like, I spent 5 weeks forgetting how much work Dave is. Okay, travel. We go to Sacramento. Flights are getting delayed. And I was going to fly to Salt Lake and then pick up a smaller plane to St. George. That was my plan. I had purchased tickets. But then it was getting delayed so much, I was going to have to get the evening flight to St. George, which would put me in St. George like at 11:30, and it was just going to be this nightmare. So the thought came to me, call Lance, and they were leaving their house in Layton like at 3 o'clock. It was so perfect. I mean, even though my flight was delayed by, it was like 3 or 4 hours, I got there just in time. They drove into the parking lot, and we were off.
That's awesome.
Yeah. During those 4 weeks, about once a week, I would say, okay, I'm going to go home to Gridley and try to handle some things. And I would start to get flights, and it would never feel right. And then Dad would have a little bit of a downturn. I'd be like, I can't go. And then like a week later, okay, I'm going to go to I never left. And I think it was so important that I not leave. I had to be there. Allison got a hotel in the very beginning, and I was able to stay with her a few nights. And then I was able to get a second room when Russ and Denton and Dave came that first weekend. Okay, medical. There's a consignment shop in Kanab that I love. And one of the first things the nurses told us was get a nursery monitor. That way you won't be worried, is he calling for us and having to always check the bedroom. So I go to that consignment shop. They had a nursery monitor. I can't believe it. Just an old school nursery monitor that worked perfectly. After he passed, I sanitized it and just gave it right back to them. I couldn't believe I found a nursery monitor in there. Gabe and Cicely were there the first day that Mike was gone. And I was there by myself. Allison wasn't there that week. And Gabe and Cicely are both nurses. They're both nurses. And so they were able to help me, like, pick him up off the hospital bed, put him on the bedside commode. I mean, they taught me all these
maneuvers.
They were there that day that they needed to be there. The hospice staff was so wonderful. And 3 times a week, these cute health aides, and I mean cute, women would come to shower him, and he loved that. It was so funny. When are they coming? Oh, it cracked me up. Okay, Kanab Fredonia people. These people, it was just so amazing to work with them. I call South Central, which is landline internet, to get my name on the account so that when he passes, it's, smooth transition. I get this lady, and she's in Panguitch or somewhere. And I explain the situation. She goes, oh, honey, I can help you with that. And she's got this thick Southern Utah accent. Can you give me your password? Oh, I said, there's no way. I said, maybe my dad remembers. And then before I even walk into my dad's room, I'm like, you know what? He's not going to remember. And she says, oh, honey, it's okay. I'll just tell you your password. And then she says, your password is Lynx. Oh, wait a minute. That's the Fredonia High School mascot. That is so cool. She's just going on and on. I was like, this is, classic Southern Utah. And she talked to Dad and to get authorization. It was so good with him. The ward, the Relief Society, they had, about the 3rd week we were there, they had this Relief Society birthday dinner. They made all this lasagna, salad, cheesecakes, and they got a very low turnout, which I'm really sad about. But we got all these leftovers. And so we were eating lasagna days and days and days. And then, of course, they handled the funeral luncheon. They were so good about it. Mosdale's,
the mortuary.
Oh, yeah. Man. Every town ought to have a mortuary, ought to have those guys helping you through that experience. I'm sure there are great morticians out there, but wow. The Mosdales are just off the charts. There was the home medical equipment guy that got us the hospital bed, the commode, the bedside tray, the adjustable pad that goes underneath them so they don't get sores. I can't remember all the stuff, but it's a long list. And we would call, hey, we need such and such. Boom, he'd be there with it. Colton was his name. And then he would make other suggestions like, hey, you could also get it. And we're like, yeah, like anything. We just decided not to be stingy. We'll just take anything that might make this easier on everyone. Zion's Way was the hospice. They were amazing. Al's at the Junction. They get you through life, right? They're fry sauce.
Yeah.
And then Steve Winward, which has been Dad's special friend. He lives in the other ward, and he's still Dad's ministering brother because there's such a tradition there. And he would be there almost every day because he walks every day, and so he'd stop in and like literally almost every day stopping in. And he's dad joke guy, right? So he and Dad would exchange dad jokes every morning. There was a lady at the state bank where my dad has his account, Cindy Forrester, who was so good. I mean, the women there loved Dad. And you could feel that in the way they were treating us. They just loved Dad and were so good to us. We were able to transfer all 3 properties into the trust during that time we were there. Like somehow, okay, it's like when Monday hit, well, once we had Dad home, took 2 or 3 days. I'm like, I've got to go through the files, which is something I should have done a lot earlier. I'm like, I've got to get my feet under me and try to understand what there is for me to deal with, and that maybe Dad can help me with before he passes. So I would go in the office. Not only were we cleaning the office, like we pulled that bad carpet out of there. Denton eventually gave us the idea of putting the bed in there, which was huge because it allowed me to stay upstairs, like during the nights and so on. I was kind of the night person.
Mm-hmm.
But started going through files, and that was huge for me. It gave me some confidence that I knew what needed to be addressed, and one of the things I discovered was that the properties were not in the trust. The trust was not named on the properties. So we were able to handle that through the trust companies and the Pioneer Trust Company in Flagstaff. If we hadn't done that one thing, it would have been months in probate for me.
Yeah.
Months. Okay, where am I? In October of 2021, he called me. I was at the park. I remember where I was, and he's like, I think I'm going to hire Lisa Allen to be my bookkeeper. And so we talked about it because I didn't really know Lisa. And he hired her, and having her already on board, think about it, that was only like 5-ish months.
Mm-hmm.
Having her already on board, he'd never had a bookkeeper like dealing with daily stuff. He had a tax prep and then a lady that did rental income. Was huge, and she was a notary.
Oh, wow.
She was a notary, so she notarized it when Dad signed the 3 properties into the trust, and she notarized all the car titles for him. Because if you sign off on a car title and it's notarized, then it's like indefinitely open for the vehicle to be sold, whether you're still alive or passed. It's called an open title, I think.
Okay.
She knew all about that, so we did that. And then she notarized the special needs trust. I mean, having her already on board, dealing with Dad's check writing and his bank accounts, and then being able to be a notary for us. Wow. Do we need to take a break?
No.
You're looking tired. Okay.
No, you're good.
And I had time to ask Dad questions. You know, during those 4 weeks, I was able to ask questions. Okay, family. My siblings and I already had a Zoom tradition established. And that was key to that Saturday morning.
The heat and huddle.
Yeah. To that Saturday morning. And then as things progressed, you know, we would have heat and huddles like with Lance and Ginny. Where we would just kind of update everybody. And we can thank the pandemic for that.
Yeah.
I don't think we were doing Zoom before the pandemic. You guys recorded Dad. It was only like 10, 12 minutes or something.
But it was nice.
Oh, it was just perfection. That was such a blessing. All of the family came. I mean, over, I would say the first 2 weeks, every family member came. I thought that was such a huge blessing. There was family there almost every night. Um, Everything happened between Brenda was in treatment for breast cancer. Everything happened in between her lumpectomy surgery and her radiation treatments. Think about that alone for her and what that meant for her. That her surgery was behind her, she was recovered. Everything went down with Dad. And then her radiation started literally the week after we all left. Mike's sister Susan Honey was amazing. She would bring meals and flowers, and she helped at the luncheon like she was in charge. And she was very concerned for Mike and Brenda and attentive to them, because we were not.
Yeah.
We were there for Dad.
Mhm.
Let me just add, Joanna Turley is my youngest Heaton cousin. And she insisted about 2 weeks in on doing a Zoom call with Dad. Allison was there. She set it up. It lasted about 15 minutes. And it was the most beautiful, spiritual, fun little conversation between her and Dad. I mean, we were all sitting around the table. But for some reason, she was determined to reach out and have that little Zoom meeting. And there were other cousins that stopped in who were in the area anyway for different things. But she was the only one that made a special trip.
Yeah.
And let me just say, Marie Popejoy, Dave's bus driver, gave me a sympathy card. She was the only one that gave me a sympathy card. And I'm not complaining because I don't do sympathy cards. But it meant so much to me. Her card meant so much to me because it was the only one I got.
Yeah. Were you surprised how much it meant to you?
Yeah.
Were you like, oh, a sympathy card? And then as you thought
Yeah.
about it, you're like, it sunk in.
And I thought to myself, I need to do sympathy cards because maybe there's people out there not getting any. Okay. Personal. Even though all the family came, it meant so much to me when you guys came. Like when my family came, it was huge. I felt like, family would come, but then you guys would come and I would just be buoyed up. I would feel so supported, like, I can do this. My family's here. So it was just huge when you guys came. Do you remember I went on a walk with you and Jordy just around the block?
Mhm.
Just that kind of thing was just like tender mercy. I do these neck exercises every week where I lay on the floor with a little rolled up towel between my shoulder blades, and that keeps me from getting headaches. I couldn't do it in Fredonia because it's hardwood floors and the carpet in the living room was just gross because of the two dogs.
Yeah.
I could never make myself do it, and I never once got a headache. Usually, if I don't do that exercise, like by the 4th or 5th day, I've got the headache.
Mhm.
I never got a headache. I had gone to the temple with Judy before I went and purchased an extra Ensign conference issue. And that was like on my bedside when I did the night shift that last night. It's what got me through the night. It was Denton's idea to bring that bed into the office, which turned out to be so critical. I never had to sleep downstairs, which is a pain for me because I get up in the night a couple times to use the restroom. All of you boys spent like good time with Dean.
Yeah.
All 4 of you did. I was able to find 2 vacation rentals for the funeral week because I'd been looking and there was nothing.
They were good rental, like a lot of
Yeah.
space. It wasn't like a sacrifice or something like that.
Like that last week, all of a sudden they were there when I
Mhm.
searched. Okay, I'm going to talk about this at the end. Okay, now the funeral services. I so desperately wanted his service to be on a Saturday like Mom's was because I knew it would be easier for people to travel. There's so many reasons why Saturday is the best day, but my cousin was getting married that day. Do you remember that?
I just remember that there was a reason. I
Yeah.
couldn't remember like which cousin it was.
Yeah,
What it
and
was.
so there was no way. Like if I had trampled on that and said, "Can you guys get married like in the afternoon so we can have the service in the morning?" Because I considered it, I knew that Dad would never forgive me. I mean, you have to honor the living, right?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah, and I was
Well,
like,
and like you said, you honor Dean by not doing it
yeah.
that morning. Yeah.
So it had to be Friday, and then Friday turned out to be a blessing. Like I knew it going in. I'm like, I don't like that it's Friday, but somehow it's going to be helpful. Somehow it's going to be helpful. And what it did was it gave me Saturday to finish up going through the house, which I know sounds so trivial, but to me it was everything. Okay, back to the funeral services. I got the organist, the chorister, and the Zoom tech guy that I wanted, that I knew would be good and could handle it. All three of them were available on a Friday, a work day. They all work.
Yeah.
We got to the flower lady on a Saturday, and Monday is her weekly flower order. She only orders once a week, and we were able to get to her and make the order in time. We had cooler weather for that Friday, which was a blessing because that grave, it turns out that burying your own is a ton of work.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how much work that was. And Dad and Lance ended up doing the bulk of it, but everybody was helping.
Do you want like the shoveling the dirt?
Yeah. Leveling, moving the gravestones, putting
And
the sod.
Yeah.
It was intense. I had no idea.
Like there was guys taking off jackets and shirts and like ties, not shirts, but like taking off their ties and like loosening up because they knew like I'm about to sweat this out.
Yeah, and in my mind, it was always such a cool thing. And so we do a mock, so we bury our own. And then that day, I'm like, this is a ton of work.
Now that I actually have to stick around and watch this.
Yes. Okay. The grandson singing "Sweet is the Work," which just happens to be my favorite hymn. That was huge. Sammy on the violin was so beautiful. I thought it was a tender mercy that my talk and Lance's talk were so different, but so good. We both got a lot of compliments, and they were very different talks. And I think together we filled the purpose of the funeral service. You know, we used the two hymns that Dad requested. It was less than an hour. Thank you very much. And the luncheon was amazing, and I was able to take pictures of family members that were there. And then Jordy. So my sisters earlier in the week had said, Jordy will take pictures, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'll ask her. I never asked her. And then in the rush of it all, I just forgot. And she came up to me at the viewing, like before the viewing started, and said, do you want me to take pictures? I'm like, yes.
I totally forgot. Yes.
So she took, the only direction I gave her was no pictures of the remains. I know from previous experience that that's just never a good idea. So she took gorgeous pictures, and my siblings just raved about how beautiful her pictures were. So what a blessing it was that she did that and thought to do it. Okay, then Friday night, we talked about all the Heatons. Well, are the Heatons going to get together Friday night? Oh, probably, but maybe they'll do it out in Moccasin. They're not going to come to the house, are they? Oh, no, they won't come to the house. Let's just not say anything and they won't come. So Friday we go over there. You remember?
This is after the funeral in the morning, right? And then
Yeah.
in the evening.
And the place is packed with relatives.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when I walked in and everybody was just there. And afterwards I thought, oh, come on, Cindy. Of course they were there.
It's a reunion. Yeah.
That's what you do. And I walked in and I'm like, we are not prepared for this. I don't know how to do this. Okay, who was there? Annie Payne with her 2 Dutch oven, upside down pineapple cakes. The next door neighbor, Kay, who's the chef at the hospital, brought this massive platter of these major big cookies. And there's a third one. Oh, and then the grandsons. I was worried about, I needed the grandsons to go through his effects, and so I'm worried about that. I'm like, everybody's here, but we need the grandsons downstairs. How are we going to do this? Well, all the stuff was down there anyway. I had just taken it down there because I knew there'd be plenty of room. And it just happened.
You were like, hey, you're all here. Why don't you guys just go down there and figure it out?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I just couldn't believe how that came together, even though I was panicked. Okay, final thoughts. My Aunt Glenda, Lowell's wife, in the very beginning, we talked on the phone and she said, I hope he doesn't suffer. My dad died of heart failure and he didn't have to suffer, and I'm so grateful. So she knew what it would look like if Dad suffered. So those hours that I spent with him on his last night, in the middle of the night. Okay, I want to describe this. So I'm sitting in the corner in a rocking chair. I've got my ensign issue. And he's got the pressure from the outside fluid. He's got fluid in his lungs. He's unresponsive. And he sounds, he's breathing, but he sounds bad. So bad. And I remember I would look over at him and I'd think to myself, how are you still with us? Like, how? I don't understand how you can be that bad and still be here. Mm-hmm. And the next morning, Jordan Hatch came. She was the main hospice nurse. She was so amazing. And I asked her, and I told her that. I said last night, I'm like, and she could hear him. Like, she's sitting at the kitchen table, and he's just down the hall, and she's like, is that him? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh. She just kind of deflated. And I said, how long is this going to last? And she said, I've seen it last up to 2 weeks. So this is the morning he died. Mm-hmm. And so we're like...
The morning of the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're like, wow, this could go for 2 weeks. So Allison and I kind of like steeled ourselves, like girded up our loins, like we can do this for 2 weeks. And then, and I asked her, I said, how is he still with us when he's this bad? And she said, it's the biology, it's the will to live. It's just really hard to shut it down. And then he died probably 3 hours later. And so when she told us it could go 2 weeks, and then he died that afternoon. So he went Tuesday night to Thursday, roughly at lunch, of suffering. What I would call suffering. What my Aunt Glenda would call suffering. So 36 hours. I figured 36 hours. Did I do the math right? And when she told us it could be 2 weeks, and then he died a few hours later, I'm like, I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll take it. 36 hours. He did it. It's done for him. And it's done for us. I'll take it. I'll take it as a tender mercy. And some people would say, you shouldn't have suffered at all. But, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the other thing. You hear all these stories about how people pass. And the thing people will say is, oh, it was peaceful. And then you hear these kind of amazing stories, like they held their hand up and they could see somebody in the corner and they're calling out names of loved ones. And, well, so-and-so visited me last night. So I'm hoping for some of this, yeah. Right? None of it. We got none of it. Allison and Mike rolled him and boom, he was gone. And so Allison starts calling me because I'm just laid down for a nap in the next room. Cindy. So I finally get up I go out, and standing right in front of me is the social worker who's there to deliver a different kind of medicine that Jordan Hatch is hoping will help him. And she's like, "Oh, I'm here to show you the medicine and explain." I'm like, "Okay." So Allison's in there. He's already gone. And she's taking me into the kitchen to explain the medicine. So I go down with her, and she's like, da, 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 probably for, it wasn't very long, maybe 20 seconds. And then finally, Allison uses her mom voice, you know, the mama bear voice.
Yeah.
"Cindy, get in here." So I'm like, and I go in there, and and he's gone. As when he walked in, I could see it in the color, you know.
Mhm.
And so then we all gather in the room, and the social worker was there, which was another very like intense tender mercy, because she could kind of help us and talk us through it. And we sang a song, we sang a hymn. And finally, we agreed to let the social worker call in the nurse who needed to be there to call it. There's a word.
Announce. I can't. I don't. I can't
Yeah.
remember the word, but like.
Yeah, there's a word. So she came in and she went through. You know, she felt for a pulse. She put the stethoscope several places. Pronounce.
Yeah.
And then did something else, and she's like, "He's gone," and she called it. And let me just tell you how that happened. Once she called it, everybody left except me. So it was the three of us. It was the nurse, but not one that we knew, a social worker, and me. And she said, "We're going to prepare the body for the morticians. Would you like to help?" And it was like, "Yeah." And so it was this process of cleaning, undressing, cleaning, dressing him again. And then they, you know, we put his blankets on him so that, you know, it kind of looked like he was asleep. And as soon as she got done, she was very tactful, methodical, caring, compassionate. As soon as that process was done, she turned to me and she said, "Where are the meds?"
Like, I'm not leaving these behind.
And I'm like, man, that must be like why she's really here.
Yeah.
And when they give you the meds, they give you this little Ziploc bag of kitty litter. So what they do is they take whatever meds you haven't used and into the kitty litter. And she probably, I would guess, has to have a witness that she's doing it. And then they just cart off the kitty litter. Okay, so then we were there maybe an hour, and the morticians show up. And I was determined to watch that. And it was such a beautiful process because they're amazing guys to begin with. But probably all morticians, you know, just learn how to do it so that people feel comforted.
Yeah.
And so they walked into the kitchen area and they kind of explained things like, "Okay, this is what's going to happen. And then you need to come to the mortuary and handle this business and give us a date and give us the program, blah, blah, blah." So then they go into the room, and I followed them into the room. And they had this large white sheet that they completely enshrouded his body in. And as they're doing it, they're talking about how this must have been how they wrapped Jesus's body. And even though the body is heavy and they're having to like, you know, they still worked in perfect tandem, like rolling him on, wrapping this way and that way and this way until he was completely enshrouded. And it was just a beautiful thing to watch. And then one of them just put his arms under the big heavy guy and carried him to the gurney, put him down, and then they had this beautiful red velvet cloth that they put over most of his body. And then they had like a special drape for his head. And then he was just kind of there in the hallway for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes as they explained a few more things. And then they rolled him out, put him in the minivan. You know, the specially designed minivan.
Yeah.
But
That is
interesting. I'm just watching this going. This is just beautiful. It's beautiful. Putting together the services was like planning a wedding in 8 days. And when it was over, it felt like I had just finished a wedding. And then the difference, okay, so this is another huge part of my experience. The difference between mom and dad. When mom passed, we had the services, we packed up and we went home. When dad passed, we had to handle things. We just had to handle things. I had to take home all his files. We had to process all his personal effects because Mike and Brenda wanted the home to feel like theirs. So we essentially cleaned everything out that was mom and dad's. We never really went through mom's stuff. We cleaned out her clothes closet, and that was it. That's all dad wanted us to do.
You saying you never went through her stuff when she passed?
Right.
Gotcha.
So when he passed, we were going through everything. And then kind of cleaning out the house. No deep cleaning. We didn't do any deep cleaning, but so it was just so much sorting. Like I would, like all 5 weeks, I would just pick a room or pick a corner and lay things out, take a picture, send it to my siblings. Okay, tell me what you want. And then sorting between donation to thrift store. This is what my siblings want. This is what can go in the garbage. You know, it was so mentally intense. And then, of course, I'm still working with the trust, and I think that will be a few years. My focus during that time was, number one, to care for dad. The second focus was to clean out the house and leave it for Mike and Brenda so it could feel like their own. Third focus was to plan the services. One of my goals, my main goal was
Can you check the cameras, just make sure the cameras are still rolling? You can keep talking, Mom.
One of my goals was to leave for home Sunday morning. I'd been there 5 weeks. I desperately wanted to go home Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And I knew how much I needed to do and the time it would take if I wanted to leave Sunday morning. And
you might not be running on this one anymore. I can't tell.
Oh, maybe it is. Hold on to where you're at, Mom. Focus on where you're at.
okay, I'm good.
Have you guys been doing one recording the whole time?
Well, we did a short one
And then stopped everything?
and then started, but it's been a while.
Yeah. And we were gone. We've been gone for a while. So I'm surprised you guys are still going at it. Cool.
Well, if you have my audio on this phone, you're good, right?
Well, the audio, but
I mean, it's not ideal, but
I mean, there's the last 30 minutes we didn't get a video. I just didn't think to check for space. Ran out of storage space. Okay, so if you're good with it just being like a black screen and you talking, then let's keep going.
Well, you're gonna switch my phone, just keep it running and move it over here now?
Yeah, why don't you end the video, start a new video. So just like click it so it ends, start it. That way it's like a different video from a different perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit weird for you for editing. I mean,
No, as long as because it's all going to come to my computer just as clips, and as long as it like is a different clip, then we're good.
like that. Let's see that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, you're on.
Okay.
You're good there.
Yeah.
So so these were my focus points and my goals. Care for Dad, clean out the house for Mike and Brenda, plan the services, leave Sunday morning, and once my relatives showed up, like a couple of cousins, I could tell that they weren't happy I wasn't spending more time with them. But I was on a mission, and I felt like my goal to leave Sunday morning and go home was a justifiable goal. And that if I spent time with them, it wasn't going to happen. I would
Yeah.
have to leave Monday or Tuesday morning. And I could tell, I would try to explain to them the situation. Like, we have to go through Mom and Dad's things now. And we had really started like 2 or 3 years previous. One year we cleaned out the basement. So it's not like it all happened in those 5 weeks. We'd been doing it. In October, we had come so Dad could work on the remodel of the bathroom, and I had done a lot of it then. And so the people didn't get, I think it's kind of a rare situation that somebody passes and you have to handle their stuff right away. I think people usually have time.
Well, I don't think. I mean, there's usually one executor in each family, so it's not like it's this commonly held position that people are familiar with, and so it's not like it's a well talked about thing. It's like, oh, she's the executor, and everyone knows what that means and the time that goes into it, and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
And so to them, they're just like, oh, but she's probably been here like a week, and it's like, no, I've been here for 5 weeks working. Like, it's just not going to connect.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of a rare experience. And so I went to my cousin's wedding. I sort of made an appearance and left. And I was able to leave the house at 5. At 5 p.m. Saturday, I walked away. And to me, that is God's hand in all of it, that I was able to walk away at 5. And then go spend the evening with my family, which everybody was, all my other siblings were doing that already.
Yeah.
But I got to finally leave at 5 and spend the evening with my family and leave Sunday morning and go home. And it was just like, wow. It's like Heavenly Father has this massive orchestra of family members and nurses and bank tellers and lawyers and trust companies, and he's just orchestrating it and bringing people in, and it just happens beautifully. And I remember Saturday morning that we got the news, and I was still in Gridley. I'm like, this is going to be hard, and I am going to look for the tender mercies because they're going to be everywhere. And they were absolutely everywhere. And as they happened, sometimes I'd pull out my phone and make a note. And sometimes, like once I got home, anytime anything would come into my mind, I'd add it to my note. And it's just amazing to watch God's hand in all of it. Just all of it. And even my siblings, like Scott and Allison, had a reunion of his side of the family planned in Tucson starting Saturday night, the day after the funeral. So they do the funeral. I don't even think they spend that night. I think they left that afternoon to go home.
That sounds right.
So that they could be there, clean house, do what they needed to do to accept all of his family coming to Tucson. I'm sure all my siblings have those stories. But yeah, tender mercies. Tender mercies. If you look for them, they are everywhere. Everywhere.
It's amazing. It feels like the perspective really helped you get through. I mean, like a lot of the stories that you just told were super stressful, super busy stories, but you didn't tell them as super busy, super stressful stories. It was, I don't know. Like in reality, I know that's what they were, but I feel like because of the Tender Mercies attitude, where you're experiencing this you know, once in a lifetime experience where your dad's passing, and you're experiencing it completely different, right? Like for me, I mean, like I don't have that Tender Mercies attitude right now. I would have just been stressed and busy the whole time. And that would have been my memory walking away from it. It would have been very little actually about my dad. It would have been very much like, man, I was so busy. Man, I was still, like,
That was a lot of work.
yeah. And that's awesome that you're able to cultivate that, especially like the tender mercy of that you got it in your mind to have an attitude of looking for tender mercies before you went through that experience. I think a lot of people have to go through that experience or something really hard to go, man, I better start cultivating a different perspective on life. Else life's going to be a lot of what I just went through, and I don't want it to be that way.
I mean, it is amazing that in life's trials, God asks us to be grateful.
Yeah.
And I haven't always been that way. I mean, it's something that I've kind of grown into, I think, over the last, I would say, 10 years, maybe, where I've really focused, where I've come out of survival mode just enough to say, okay, I can be grateful.
Yeah. Was there any final things that you wanted to say, or?
Nope.
Probably just last question to wrap it up. How do you feel like you were able to process? I mean, obviously you process it through the lens of looking for tender mercies. You're grateful that your dad didn't suffer, but like you on a personal level, like your dad is no longer with us here on earth. Like, how'd you process that? How do you feel about that? How'd it feel when it happened? How are you feeling about it now?
I remember, okay, he passed. The morticians came and took him, and we did some quick cleanup of his room, but the medical equipment guy wasn't able to come till the next day. So we're like, we're just going to leave this room alone, because Laura was waiting to move into it. And then I think we went to do laundry. Yeah, we went to do laundry. I don't know if that was that night, but one night Allison and I went to wash all of Dad's clothes at the laundromat so they'd be ready for you guys to go through. Anyway, we found a reason to get out of the house. And when we came back, I walked in and the house felt so different. It felt very different and empty. Even though there's still, people there. It felt very empty. It felt very different. One thing that I do is I have these mental conversations with people on the other side. I've done it with my grandmas for years. I talk to them a lot. I don't really talk to my grandpas. I don't know why, but I talked to Edna and Lucille a lot. When my mom passed, I started talking to her. And I've done that quite a bit with my dad. And I think that must help me not be really sad. Because to me, they're there. They're just in another realm, and I have conversations with them.
Keeps the relationship alive.
Yeah, but it is weird when you think, "Oh, I'll call Dad," and then you realize he's gone.
Yeah.
Like phone conversations that you would have, that now you have to have in other ways, or you wait to have in the next life, and so I think I'm doing okay. I mean, it helped a lot. He was 91. He said at one point, I really thought I'd make it to 100. And I said, I thought so too, Dad. So I think it was a little bit of a surprise to us because he'd had a garden the previous summer. I mean, there were signs. He was sleeping so much. He would tire so easily.
Yeah.
There were signs, but I think he was okay. He was okay with going.
And that helped you. Like you're watching him be okay with it.
Yeah.
You're not watching like a suffering, fighting, like, oh, I don't want to go. And you're like, oh, man, right? Like,
Yeah.
his closure is almost your closure.
It is interesting to watch somebody like mentally wrap their minds around the fact that they are on hospice, that they have been given 2 to 4 weeks. I remember after the first group of family came that first weekend that everybody left, and I went in and he said, is everybody gone? Or something like that. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, well, people have stopped coming. Like sometimes he would have these, like this is the end kind of thoughts, and sometimes he would vocalize them. Like one day he said, I think this is going to happen fast. Well, it didn't. That was like 2 weeks before. I mean, when he had the final downturn, it happened fast.
Yeah.
But sometimes he would have, I think, some like hard moments. And I think that's one of the good things about having people come to visit is that it distracts you
Yeah.
from that.
Like, it helps a day go by without you realizing a day's gone by. Also,
Yeah.
a couple of weeks gone by. And, yeah.
When they gave him the option to go on hospice, so when he went into the ER that night, so 2 weeks earlier, he'd had his lungs drained, and that was a very difficult experience for him. He had to go to St. George, had to be under anesthesia, and because it was considered a surgery, he was in line, and it got delayed until late in the afternoon. So it was just this absolutely exhausting experience. And so his choice was keep doing that once a week and maybe extend your life 2 or 3 months or go on hospice now. It wasn't much of a choice. But I thought he was still very brave to say, I'm not going to St. George again. I'm on hospice.
Yeah. A final, acceptance. Well, I'm sure that was a really good interview. I'm sure we'll have another one because I think we tackled that whole experience from a certain angle. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. I would actually be really interested in having an interview where I more or less interviewed Dad about the experience, but also you're on the mic. Because I think Dad has an interesting relationship with Dean, and Dad processed those final weeks, I think, a certain way, and it should be interesting, I think, for you to hear it, but also comment on it.
That would be good. Dad told me the other night, he said, I think your dad liked me because I kind of understood a lot of what he was doing and was interested. He said one time we were all there and he went out into the shop and was just tinkering around. And at some point, Dad comes, what are you doing? What are you looking at? What do you want to do?
Yeah.
So, just excited that somebody's interested.
Well, that was experience, at the funeral. At the funeral, I was doing all right. And not that I ever got sad. There's just different types of crying, right? Never cried because I was sad. But to me, what tears me up is the realization, and I think you find this a lot with guys, is the moment that you look at someone who's 91 or someone's talking about that person that was 91. So I think Lance was telling a story, and it hit me in my heart that at the end of the day, Dean is just a little boy, and it's so hard unless I can look at my nephews and it doesn't matter how old they get, you're a little kid in my mind, Lola and McKay, because I remember them being little kids. But for me looking up, I have such a hard time with you and Dad or anyone that's older than me thinking, oh yeah, at one point you're a little girl or a little boy, or this is just the first time you're going through life and you're trying to figure it out in the same way that I'm trying to figure it out. And that was when I lost at the funeral. I was just sobbing, and I was like, I just embarrassed about crying. I don't know why. But well, yeah, it was that moment where I had never looked at Dean through the lens of, oh yeah, at one point he was a little boy, and that is, life had called upon him to try and be not that, and that you do not be, you're not a little boy most of the time, but at the end of the day, I think all men have a little boy in them, and that's pure and peaceful, and that was awesome. I was really happy that I was able to see him that way or feel that towards him. It's so much more relatable, in my mind. He's just always been the finished product, where he's always helping neighbors, and that's all he thinks about is the garden and helping people and being kind, and not, I'm not saying when he's a little boy he wasn't that way, but that he was a little boy who was fantastical, or used to like push a little truck around or whatever, and it was fun to gain that lens at the funeral.
Sometimes something will happen with Dad, and the thought will come to me.
You're talking about Russ, right?
Yeah, Russ. Something will happen with Russ, like he'll say something or do something, and I think to myself, he's just a 10-year-old boy who just lost his mom.
Yeah. You're gonna make me cry right now.
Yeah. So has Dad talked about losing Barbara?
He kind of just talked about the stories around it. We did do an interview. Yeah, we did an interview about it. I think about 90% of it was kind of just like how crazy it was and
fast.
And how fast. And it was a lot of just stories of like, what were you and your brothers doing with no parents at home? And it's like, oh, we were shooting the BB gun at the electrical wires above the house and making sparks. Like, what? Like just these crazy stories.
I remember when Wilf and Marge passed. Was it Wilf? I think Wilf passed first. That we were out at the gravesite, and I was kind of standing by Dad, and then his brothers came over, and they were kind of talking about how it was still so hard to be at the Gridley Cemetery with Quist family. Like it was all too similar still to when Barbara passed.
Yeah. Do you remember when we went out to the whatever, anyways, that property out? What's the old peak?
The ranch on Liberty. Yeah.
And we all pulled out the recorders, and even I thought I had a pretty good understanding of what was happening. But as Bob's talking about it, everyone's sobbing, especially the daughters, who weren't even Barbara's kids. But they're sobbing, and as we're walking away, I was like, oh, was that a pretty? I'm talking, I think Roxanne. I was like, oh, was that a pretty special experience? And she's like, it's probably the most important thing that's ever happened in our family was that event, and I've never heard anyone talk about it my entire life. And I think she's saying two things, which is how special it was to hear him talk about Barbara that way, but also I think she's saying, she's making a statement about where everyone's at, that to hear Bob talk about it must mean that we've taken a step, and it doesn't matter if it's the first step in 30 years, that I bet Russ, is watching his dad talk about it, that they're all taking a step towards healing that they'll probably never get in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And so as I'm walking on the peach orchard, I was like, oh man, I do not understand.
Because we did the ranch, and then we went to the cemetery, and we all sat around Barbara's grave. I don't know if you're confusing the two locations. I know it was the same reunion.
It was the same. Well, yeah, we did like a little tour.
At the ranch. Yeah, we started at the ranch.
I'm just saying the conversation I had with Roxanne didn't happen until we went, and just whatever portion that was where Bob's telling the stories. Anyways, I'm just saying it was all part of it. But yeah, the memory that I had was at the peach orchard and talking about it.
And it was so amazing to me because Bob, generally speaking, is very sparing of Judy's feelings when it comes to Barbara. I mean, she struggles with the fact that she's a second wife, and and Bob knows it, and so he's very cautious. And so that anybody even thought to set that up, to have the two of them sitting at Barbara's grave with all of us around talking about it, and that Judy did so well. I mean, she did so well with that. And most of the time she does.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
really well. And I've told you, I think that when Dad and I were first married, I came to Gridley, that people would call me Judy sometimes. And I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years into it, I'm like, Judy, do you realize people call me Judy sometimes? And she was like, they do? I told you that.
No.
And she said, oh, when I first married Bob, people called me Barbara all the time. And I never said anything. But it was really hard. And it just makes me feel so good that people call you Judy.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not. Oh, that is cool.
And I don't get it as often now, but every once in a while somebody will still call me Judy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was that day at the cemetery, that whole day. But at the cemetery, that was God's orchestration making
Yeah.
that happen.
Well, and I heard this quote one time. I'm gonna start crying. I'm glad the cameras aren't working properly and I'm not on it. Time to get insecure. But it was this quote about how a boy's first love is his mother, and then it was like a girl's first love. A girl's first love is her father, and a girl's last love is her son, or something like that. And I don't know why, but every time I think about that quote, I think about like 4 boys that like that was robbed of them, like they felt it, but there's like a difference in like feeling your mother's love at like an innocent point in your life, and then also like feeling your mother's love when you're going through it. You're like you're just going through life. You look back at your mom, she still loves you. Doesn't really matter that you're going through a hard time. I hate it. Like I hate that the dad and his brothers had to like traverse going through it. And like I think about some of like the difficulties that dad's had with the business or with Bob. And I just like, Barbara would have been right there, just like, you know what I'm saying? Like if dad was treating me the way that Bob sometimes treated dad, I think you would have been like, hey Trevor, don't like I don't know, you would have supported me in the way that I would have needed to be supported to like grow past that and become my own man. And I just look at dad and I'm like, man, he was just robbed of like the true love that every man needs for his whole life.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. I asked Dad once if it felt like an abandonment to him, and he said yes, that it did.
Yeah. So we've already interviewed Dad on that. I think about, like I said, about 90% of it was really just stories about what the boys are doing. But then he did go into it and did talk about kind of how it felt and how he thinks it felt. I mean, he was 10 years old, but yeah, I think he would talk about Dean's death a lot differently. And I think it'd be valuable for you to be there to hear it, and also to make comments and a little back and forth going.
Yeah. Because he was there twice. Well, no, just he was there once when Dad was still alive, and then he got there, I think, Tuesday night of the week of the service. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's plan on an awesome interview.